He looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're lucky to even have a job." Just like that, no warning, no shame. I'd been working there for 8 years, showing up early, staying late, never asking for much. And that was his thank you. You. My stomach sank. I nodded, kept my face still. But inside, something cracked. Not anger, not yet. Just a cold, steady silence. The kind that shows up right before everything changes. That was the moment I knew. He thought I was stuck, but he had no idea what was coming. My name's Darren, I'm 36 years old. I used to be a mid-level operations manager at a commercial logistics firm just outside of St. Louis. The kind of job where no one really knows what you do until something breaks, then suddenly everyone's screaming your name. I wasn't flashy, never cared for titles or chasing attention. I believed in keeping my head down, showing up on time, and doing things right. There's a certain pride that comes from being the guy people can depend on when the pressure's up. That's how I was raised. I'd built a life that made sense to me. Nothing extravagant, just stable. A small home on the outskirts of town, paid off in slow chunks over 11 years. My dad helped me lay the tile in the kitchen before he passed. I still don't walk on that floor without thinking about him. I had a black lab named Murphy, who'd wait by the door every day at 5:47 p.m. like clockwork. I didn't have kids, wasn't married, but I wasn't lonely. I had my routines, a few close friends, Sunday coffee at the same diner with my neighbor George. I was all right with life being quiet. My job? It wasn't a dream, but it paid the bills, gave me structure, and more than anything, it felt secure. I'd been with that company 8 years, worked my way up from warehouse coordinator to office floor. It wasn't glamorous, but I earned my stripes. I never called in sick, never missed a deadline. I trained new hires like they were family. I even took on extra roles when others left. At some point, without realizing it, I'd become the guy holding the walls up. But here's the thing about being the person who always steps up: people stop noticing. They just expect it. I didn't mind, not at first. I figured hard work would speak for itself. I never asked for recognition, never pushed for promotions. I thought being loyal meant something, that if I just kept showing up, they'd show up for me when it mattered. Then came the merger. That's when I started noticing the shift. New faces in suits I didn't recognize. Long meetings behind closed doors. Fewer updates. Less eye contact. But I told myself it was temporary. A storm to ride out. That's what people like me do. We ride out the storms. It's how I'd gotten through everything else in life. Still, part of me started to feel uneasy, like the ground I'd been standing on wasn't as solid as I thought. I brushed it off, focused on the work, focused on being useful. But deep down I think I knew. I just didn't want to face it yet, and maybe that's where I went wrong. Maybe I gave too much faith to people who never earned it. It didn't happen all at once. That's the part that messes with you. It's not like someone flips a switch and suddenly everything's wrong. It was gradual, quiet, like a slow leak in a tire. At first, you don't notice the pressure drop until you're stranded. The first thing I remember feeling off was the budget meeting. It was the start of Q2, and for the first time in years I wasn't invited. Normally I sat in, reviewed the logistics numbers, forecasted fleet maintenance costs. This time, nothing. I chalked it up to a scheduling error, told myself it wasn't a big deal. But then I noticed something else. The expense reports. Mine had always been straightforward. Monthly fuel reimbursements, minor office supply costs, all approved without question. But suddenly, I was getting flagged for things like a $14 parking fee. I had to justify it 3 times before they signed off. Then came the silence. Emails that used to get same-day responses now sat unread for days. Meetings were moved without telling me. Projects I'd managed for years were handed off to people I barely knew, mostly new hires from the merger. One of them, a guy named Chase, couldn't even tell you where we stored backup inventory. But somehow he was suddenly looped into every executive thread. I asked my supervisor about it. His reply? We're just trying to realign responsibilities. Post-acquisition. Nothing personal. But it felt personal. Things kept piling up in little ways. I'd log into our shared systems and find permissions changed. Files I created were altered or locked. I wasn't included in certain performance reviews anymore. And then one morning, I came in to find my desk had been moved. No warning, no reason. Just a memo on my chair. Facilities update. See relocation. Schedule. The new desk? It was in a low-traffic hallway next to the break room fridge. Not exactly subtle. I remember standing there that morning holding my coffee, watching a sticky note fall off my monitor like even the office itself was giving up on me. The message was clear. I wasn't essential. I was tolerated. And barely. One afternoon, I overheard something that stuck with me. I was walking past the glass conference room. They thought the door was shut, but it wasn't. One of the directors said, "We need to start trimming legacy weight, quietly." Legacy weight. I knew exactly what that meant. People like me, long-timers. The ones who'd been there before the merger. The ones whose salaries had grown over time. We were line items now, not people. And still, I kept showing up. I told myself it was a phase, a strategy shift, a misunderstanding. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't losing sleep. I'd stare at the ceiling at 3 a.m., trying to figure out if I was paranoid, or if I was just finally seeing things for what they were. Because deep down, I could feel it. Something was coming. I just didn't know how bad it was going to get. It happened on a Thursday, April 14th, 10:42 a.m. to be exact. I remember the time because I had just come back from the warehouse floor and saw the email pop up on my phone. As I walked back to my desk, the new one they'd shoved me into near the break room. The subject line read, "Internal role realignment notification, effective immediately." I opened it without thinking, already used to weird HR phrasing, by now. But the second I saw my name listed in the third paragraph, everything inside me went quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't come with peace, more like when your ears ring after a loud bang. They'd reassigned my role, stripped most of my duties, gutted my title down to something vague. Process liaison, whatever the hell that meant, and cut my salary by 28%. No warning, no meeting, no call, just an email blast sent to over 200 employees. They left my name on the distribution list, like I wasn't even worth the courtesy of a direct message. I sat there staring at the screen for maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. I don't really know. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My coffee went cold. I remember that. The smell of burnt grounds and that bitterness lingering under my nose while my chest stayed perfectly still. Not angry, not sad, just hollow. After about 20 minutes, I walked to my supervisor's office. He didn't even look surprised to see me, just sighed and motioned for me to close the door. I asked him straight up, "Why didn't anyone tell me this was coming?" His answer? "We had to move quickly. You've been with us a long time, Darren, and frankly, we thought you'd understand the business decision." A business decision. 8 years of loyalty, nights missed, birthdays skipped, saving their ass during the 2020 shipment collapse. And now I was a business decision. I didn't say a word after that. He filled the silence with corporate noise, cost optimization, streamlining, shifting verticals. It was all filler. He wasn't even talking to me anymore. He was talking around me like I was a speed bump he had to roll over to get to his next meeting. When I got home that night, I pulled up my pay stubs, cross-referenced them with ours, looked at archived memos. And that's when I saw the deeper betrayal. Turns out the salary cut wasn't new. It had started incrementally 3 pay periods ago. First, just a 6% withholding adjustment buried in line item language, then 11% the following check. No explanation, no approval. They were quietly draining me, betting I wouldn't notice, until it was too late. They didn't demote me on a whim. They planned this, and they planned it while shaking my hand at the last quarterly meeting and thanking me for being the backbone of the operations team. You know what really drove it. Home? That same day, April 14th, I got a Slack ping from one of the merger execs. His name was Tom. I'd never spoken to him before, but his message read, "Hey Darren, hope you're adjusting okay. We really value experienced folks like you helping us transition legacy systems. Keep up the good work." I stared at that message for 10 full minutes. My hands clenched the desk so hard my knuckles turned white. The kind of tension where your body doesn't even let you cry because you're not done processing the betrayal yet. That weekend, I drove out to the old mechanic my dad used to go to, sat in the car for an hour, not even sure why I was there. Maybe I just needed to feel grounded. That old garage smell, the mix of rubber, oil, and metal, reminded me of a time when work still meant something. When showing up mattered. Because in that office, at that company, I wasn't a person anymore. I was a line on a spreadsheet, an expendable tool, and worst of all, I knew exactly who was behind it. The CEO, Mark Ellison. The same man who shook my hand every holiday party, who once told me my leadership during the Q4 chaos saved the quarter. The man who smiled across the boardroom table and said, "You're lucky to even have a job." At the time, I thought he was just being arrogant. Now I understood. He was telling me the truth. In his mind, I was lucky. Lucky to still be under his control. Lucky to be quiet. To be used. That was the moment everything changed. Not because they took something from me, but because they thought I wouldn't fight back. I didn't quit. That was the first part of the plan, staying in place. Most people think revenge starts with walking out, slamming the door, making a scene. But real power doesn't come from noise. It comes from silence and precision. I stayed quiet. I played dumb. I acted like I was adjusting to my new role, just like that VP suggested. But behind the scenes, I was already pulling threads. It started with property records. See, I remembered something small, something Mark Ellison, our CEO, mentioned once at a company mixer years ago. He bragged about owning his estate outright after a messy divorce, how proud he was that it wasn't tied to the company or under a trust. I don't know why that detail stuck with me, but it did. And that became the first pressure point. I started digging into county records, public real estate databases, liens. Took me a few days, but eventually I found it. His house, a sprawling, gated colonial just outside Chesterfield. He'd refinanced it twice in the last 3 years, and more recently there was a notice of default, quietly filed. No press, but it was there. Turns out, behind the polished image, the guy was cash-strapped. Kept digging. Credit lines, lawsuits from contractors, missed HOA dues. And then the real kicker, a foreclosure auction scheduled for late September. 6 months out. Still hush-hush. Phase 2 was patience. I didn't breathe a word of what I knew. I kept working. I took the pay cut, showed up early, left late. I volunteered for every miserable task they threw at me. Because if I was going to make a move, I needed cover. I needed the illusion of being compliant, invisible. Meanwhile, I spent weekends reading up on foreclosure law, real estate bidding, asset tracking. I spoke to 2 attorneys and a retired property investor. Learned every angle of how those auctions worked, how the banks price the property, who gets notified, how the bidding process functions down to the letter. Then came the paperwork. I registered an LLC under a separate name. Nothing tied to me. Used a P.O. box and a burner phone. Moved $94,000 from my savings and investments into a separate account. Enough to cover the minimum opening bid and fees, with a margin. I wasn't planning to outbid a dozen people. I was planning to be the only one who showed up. And if I was right about Ellison's pride, he hadn't told a soul he was defaulting. He was the kind of man who'd let the ship sink before admitting water was leaking in. I watched the weeks go by. At work, he was still parading around like nothing was wrong. Still quoting earnings projections and making speeches about lean operations. I smiled. I nodded. I clapped at the all-hands meetings. But every time he opened his mouth, all I heard was, "You're lucky to even have a job." September came. I drove to the county courthouse that morning and signed in for the auction. I was early, only 2 other bidders there, neither registered, for Ellison's property. When the address came up, 4129 Wakefield Crest, they called it once, twice. No bids. Then mine. $80,500. All cash, no contingencies. Hammer dropped. That house, the one he'd used to show off his wealth, the one he thought was untouchable, was now mine. And here's the beautiful part. I didn't evict him. Not immediately. I gave it time. I had the legal right to serve notice within 30 days, but I waited 60. I wanted the papers to show up at the same time as our Q4 operations review, the one I was assigned to shadow, the one he completely forgot. I was even part of. They handed him the envelope during the review. I sat across the table, watched his hands tremble as he opened it. Watched his eyes scan the document, realizing the property had been sold, and he was no longer the legal owner. Watched the color drain from his face when he saw the LLC name and the signature. Mine. For a moment, I don't think he even processed it. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. He just slowly turned to me and whispered, "You?" And I said calmly, "I'm just doing what's best for the business." That was it. No threats, no insults, no raised voice, just his own words turned inside out. He had no comeback for that. He knew exactly what he'd done. He knew this wasn't personal revenge, it was justice. It was exposure. He moved out, quietly, within 45 days. Rumor spread fast, though not from me. People noticed when his car stopped showing up. When his name was quietly removed from internal documents. There was no dramatic press release, just silence. Heavy, telling silence. Funny thing is, HR tried to push me out 3 weeks later, said my attitude wasn't aligned with company culture. But by then, I didn't care. I'd already submitted my resignation the day after the deed was finalized. They just didn't know it yet. And just when you think the story ends there, there's one more thing. Because 6 months after that, I sold the house. Not for profit. I sold it to a local housing nonprofit. They turned it into transitional housing for single fathers who'd lost their homes. Men who were doing their best, working long hours but kept getting buried by systems designed to break them. Men like me. I didn't want the house. I wanted what it represented, to belong to someone who knew what it meant to earn something the hard way. And now it does. Life, after all of it, didn't shift overnight. Revenge doesn't come with fireworks or applause. What it gives you is space, stillness. And for me, that was enough. After I walked away from the company, I didn't rush into another job. I took the first real break I'd had in over a decade. No emails, no performance reviews, no deadlines to meet or masks to wear. Just mornings with Murphy, walks through, the park, and silence that didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. Mark Ellison never returned to his former position. Word got around, not just about the foreclosure, but about the restructuring scandal he quietly buried with fake promotions and manipulated pay stubs. Turns out I wasn't the only one who got hit with a sudden realignment. HR got audited 2 months after I left. 3 more people from the old team reached out thanking me. One of them had almost filed bankruptcy because of a sudden paycheck reduction they hadn't questioned. I gave them copies of the paperwork I had. No speeches, just facts. He ended, up stepping down publicly for personal reasons. Never admitted a thing, of course. That's how men like him operate. But once the money dries up and the power fades, they don't have much else to hide behind. Last I heard, he was living in a condo downtown, renting, keeping a low profile. As for me, I didn't go back to corporate life. Instead, I started doing something slower, quieter. I started helping people navigate foreclosures, taught them how to read through the noise, see through the traps, take back control before it's too late. Nothing fancy, just real help. One case at a time. I don't make the kind of money I used to, but I sleep better. And I've realized that's worth more than any paycheck. Sometimes people ask me if I'd do it all again, if I regret waiting so long to act. I don't. Because if I had fought back in anger, I wouldn't have won anything. But by waiting, by thinking, by learning the system inside and out, I didn't just hit back. I changed the ending. And here's the truth. I didn't ruin his life. I just gave him a front row seat to the consequences he thought he'd never have to face. You want to know the part that still sticks with me the most? It's that phrase. You're lucky to even have a job. Because he was right about one thing. Luck did play a part, but the luck wasn't mine. It was his. Because for years I gave everything I had without asking for anything back. Until I didn't. Until I stopped letting people define my worth. And I'll leave you with this. Peace isn't quiet, it's earned.